Wives, submit to your husbands. We hear that a lot. But does it really mean that? Does it mean my husband is my boss and I have to do whatever he tells me to do? Because I actually think that kind of thinking can harm your marriage more than help it. So join us today for that answer. I am so glad you're joining us today for the biblical answer to what does wives submit to their husbands actually mean? Because I see this in marriages a lot, and somehow men are being taught that of course they're the men of the household, which they are, but they've been taught that they're the boss, they rule over their wife, what they say goes in their marriage. And I actually think that hurts marriages and destroys them. So we did a marriage conference here, and we called it the Marriage Questions Conference. We spent one entire day, 8 hours, 3 Bible teachers, Mike Winger, Alan Parr, and Dr. Sean McDowell. And we had them answer really difficult marriage questions. And this particular question, what it means, what does the Bible mean for wives submitting to husbands? That question went to Dr. Sean McDowell. I'm sure he's super happy about that. But anyway, he answered that, and watch this to see what he has to say.
The second question we're going to talk about is the whole submitting to your husband kind of a thing, because that's kind of a big deal. I am not going to be talking throughout this whole conference. I'm just like, I'm a monitor or whatever it's called. But I am going to talk about this particular question just because I'm a woman, I teach Bible, and women are having to deal with this a lot. So I'm going to tell you how I feel like I've got like 2 minutes, and then you can tell me if I'm on the right track or not. Because here's what I think a lot is going on in some of the churches, and a lot of men are being taught that, you're the leader, which they are, but it's this idea of I'm the boss of you and I can tell you what to do anytime and you have to listen to me because that's just the way it is and that's just how it is. And when men do that to their wives, as a wife, with a husband who doesn't treat me like that, I literally think it destroys women and it destroys marriages. So here's my scenario. Someone called me one time and said, we're married, we go to this church. I do not like the church we're going to. I don't like the pastor. I don't trust him. I went to my husband and told my husband this. Thankfully, her husband was smart enough to be like, well, honey, let's go find another church then. He loved this church. She didn't. He didn't say, I'm the boss of you and you're going to listen to me. He did not do that. So they went and found another church. He goes back to the original church and he goes to the leadership and says, I just want you to know that we're going to be leaving the church. And they said to him, you need to be a man. You need to go home, you need to be a leader to your wife, and you need to tell her absolutely not that you are staying at this church. Now, that unfortunately is what's going on out there. Now, I say that because this husband of this woman, he was great, and he loved his wife enough to care more for her than he did himself. He never thought he was the boss of her. For my own marriage with my husband, Rob, he always says this, Lisa, I don't worry about your verse about submission. I worry about my verse, which is Ephesians 5. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. So it's like when Rob loves me, it's sacrificial. It's like he cares more for me and what I think than what he cares about. And so what happens in our marriage is when a decision has to be made, 99% of the time, that's what I'm saying, if men are doing this with their wife right, us women, we win. Like hands down, it's the greatest marriage ever because he loves us and they care more for us. So 99% of the time he's like, Lisa, whatever you want to do, I'm fine with. Now, if there's that, 2% that I'm like, Rob, I think we should do this. And he's like, nope, I really totally feel like the Lord's calling us to do this. Then that's when I get to step in and say, you know what, Rob, I respect you. I know that decision's hard to make because you love me so much that you care more for me. But if you are that adamant about that, then I'm respecting you, going with you and going that. So, and I get that there has to be like a leader in a country or, even in a marriage. But I always say if men can learn how to love their wives sacrificially and not, I'm the boss of you and you have to listen to me, I think it changes a marriage. It changes a woman. She has no problem coming under his authority when they're treated like that. But if Rob bossed me around all the time, I would be miserable. So anyway, that's my thought. I always say if men need to learn how to love their wives sacrificially, and us women, we need to be careful and respect our husbands when they do have to make a difficult decision, because it is very hard. So right track, wrong track.
Love your response. And it pains me to hear that a woman does not feel comfortable and loved at a church. And the church's response is, man up, tell her what to do.
It's shocking.
It's disturbing, and that's a kind of abuse. I do believe Scripture teaches that there are certain roles for pastors in the church, certain roles for men in a marriage, but it's not a top-down power role, do what I say. What the church should have done is, wow, I'm really bothered that she doesn't feel loved and cared for here. Can we sit down together and ask some questions? What could we do better? How can we make you feel loved? Gosh, if she's feeling this way, I wonder if others feel this way. That's the kind of love and service and leadership that the Scripture teaches. Like you said, leading with love. So there's some verses in the Bible that if you take them out of context, biblical context, cultural context, can seem pretty disturbing. I mean, you take this verse in itself, Ephesians 5:24. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives submit in everything to their husbands. You take that out of context, and sadly, it's been used this way many times. Women listen to men. And by the way, it doesn't say women submit to men. It says wives submit to husband. That's an important distinction. And say, I have the authority, do what I say. Can I tell you, any pastor who does that, any husband who does it and uses the passage this way is going to have to give account to the Lord for abusing the Scriptures. There is an authority structure built into the family and built into the church. But the question is, like you said, what are the responsibilities and what is this authority supposed to look like? So right after it says, wives submit in everything to their husbands, it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So men are given the commandment, husbands are given the commandment, to love their wives. The next question is, what does it mean to love my wife? Does it mean to have the authority, tell her what to do because I'm the boss? That's the opposite of what it means. It means love her and give himself up for her as Christ did the church. And of course, the question is, how did Christ give himself up for the church? Well, Philippians 2 makes it very clear that although Christ was and is God, he humbled himself and laid aside certain rights and authority and power to lay down his life. The kind of leadership men are called to, husbands are called to in the marriage, is one of sacrifice, one of humility, one of following the example of Jesus, who when they tried to rush to make him king, he's like, nope, I'm going to go up alone and pray. The kind of leadership that says, yeah, I might be the leader of these disciples, but instead of telling you to wash my feet, I'm going to wash your feet. So yeah, there is an authority structure, I believe Scripture teaches, in the family, in the church. And women are called in this to submit to their husbands. But it's not a power move. It's not used to abuse the wife. And it grieves me when I hear stories like this. It is one of love. And what I found is I've talked with my wife about this. I'm like, do you think when a husband is really sacrificing and loving his wife in this fashion, does it come more easily and naturally for a woman to submit? She's like, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And by the way, last thing I'll say about this, we tend to look at this passage through 20th century modern egalitarian ethos if we go back to the culture at this time, what Paul was saying is radical. He's saying, men, you don't have unending power over your wives. You actually have to love her sacrificially. And the early church was flooded with women believing and finding liberation and sexual liberation in the church because they were eager for men to lead in the example of Jesus. So yes, the Bible teaches this. Now where it gets tricky and what we're going to get into today, so to speak, is what happens when the husband is not keeping up his end of the bargain. That's where it gets difficult, and that's where it gets tricky. And we're going to work through some of those nuances today. But in some men, you've got the responsibility to love sacrificially, to sanctify your wife and care about her spiritual development first. That's actually a pretty tall order that gives me fear as a husband to make sure I'm doing that. So I wish more men would read this. Instead of going, good, I've got the power, make me dinner, they go, oh my goodness, I'm humbled. God gave me this responsibility.
Yeah.
I better make sure I am loving my wife in the way that Jesus did.
Yeah. It terrifies my husband. He's like the greatest guy in the whole world. He just loves to, because he really cares about what God thinks about that. And so but as a woman, you can't imagine how much we hear the abuse that goes on. And it's just like, I don't know. I just want to reach these men. Now, on the offhand of that, we will, because the men here, they're getting ready to leave. They're like, I don't want to be here anymore. We will talk about, like, on the offhand of that, like, what if your wife is, last night, one of the questions is, what if your wife is a witch? And Mike Winger was like, do you mean like an actual witch? And I'm like, no, like just someone that's just not very nice. But so we will go down that road too with the women. So
all right, I hope that helped answer the whole submit to your husband question. If you would like to watch the rest of this particular session with all the questions, I will put the link below. If you want to watch the entire series, you can go to womensbiblestudy.com. Hope you have a really good day.